Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials and the Environmental Council of the States for our second webinar on risk communication of waterborne contaminants. I'm Carrie Weiss, Director of Environmental Health for ASTHO. Last week we focused on per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, and today we will focus on harmful algal blooms. These webinars have been made possible through funding from EPA's Office of Research and Development. The contents represent the views of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the EPA. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a couple of polling questions to get a sense of who is on the call today. First, please indicate which type of agency best represents your affiliation. Great. It looks like we have a majority coming from state health departments and state environmental departments. Next, please indicate which state your organization resides. This will help us figure out who's turning in today. Great, thank you. I'm seeing over 30 states. Lastly, please indicate which two areas of risk communication you would like to see additional guidance on for HABs. Okay, I'm seeing a preference for the message and sharing what you know and what you don't know. This is very similar to the results we saw last week for PFAS risk communication as well. With that, I will hand it over to Sarah Grace Longsworth of ECOS to provide a background on our project. Sarah Grace?
Great, thank you so much, Carrie. We are glad to see that there's so much interest in risk communication of these particular waterborne contaminants. PFAS and HABs are two priority contaminants that states struggle to communicate the risks of. Most state environmental and health agencies have oversight of their water systems and are responsible for implementing mitigation measures to reduce chemical exposure, protect public health, and communicate risks associated with contaminated water. Although the U.S. EPA issued a drinking water health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFAS and draft recreational or swimming guideline values for cyanotoxins, states still issue their own health advisories or regulations for these contaminants, compounding efforts to streamline communications and help the public understand the risks. As state environmental and health regulators consider actions on contaminants, it's really important to frame the subject in a unified manner for the public and for other stakeholders. So to help states overcome these communication challenges, ECOS and ASTHO signed a Memorandum of Agreement with EPA's Office of Research and Development to identify ways in which state environmental and health agencies frame their risk communications for contaminants. Beginning last fall, ECOS and ASTHO interviewed 13 geographically and programmatically diverse states on their risk communication strategies for the two contaminants, as seen by the map here. After conducting interviews with state environmental and health agencies, ECOS developed 7 case study fact sheets and ASTHO developed 6. The case studies will be available publicly following the webinar today. We noticed some common themes across all of the interviews we conducted. For those of you who also attended the PFAS webinar last week, many of the high-level takeaways are very much the same. The speakers will get into more specific details about their agency's efforts, but for those of you who did not attend last week's webinar, a few things we noticed lie in timing, consistency of messaging, and coordination, and I'll explain a few of those now. States said that keys to successful risk communication reside in consistency of messaging in and across agencies in the state, timing, and honesty. The faster a state can disseminate information that is truthful and comprehensive, the better it will be received by concerned communities. State environmental agencies need to coordinate closely with other agencies like those in their health counterparts, departments of agriculture, or poison control centers. They need to establish roles and responsibilities for all players before an event. Coordinated and succinct messaging is helpful for avoiding public perception of perceived risks. For example, when a HAB impacts the recreational use of a water body, but the drinking water is not impacted, the drinking water provider needs to articulate to the public that their water is still safe to drink. HABs risk communication is challenging because of the differences between HABs in drinking water and HABs in recreational water bodies, so it's important to establish protocol for each instance. The states we interviewed noted that multi-agency involvement is key, but collaboration only works if agencies sort out roles and craft messages prior to a contamination event. Next, education is really important, not just with the public, but to agency staff and the media as well. In many states, there are dozens of local health departments with varying degrees of knowledge, interests, and experiences in dealing with HABs. Agencies noted the challenge of bringing local health departments up to speed to understand these issues. Also, while social media is a great mechanism for getting information to as many people as quickly as possible, it can also be a curse in that it makes the flow of credible information difficult and sometimes causes unnecessary concern among the public. States have implemented HABs regulations for many years, but now the public can easily look up information online themselves. States asserted the need to maintain credible information control by encouraging responsible and accurate reporting of these issues. Furthermore, states who have experienced many HABs incidents tend to use interactive maps on their websites. These types of tools have proven successful in getting information out there early and often and serve as a great way for the public to look up accurate information straight from the agency itself. Overall, it's important to continue these collaborative efforts where states share what they know and use what they can from other states so as to not recreate the wheel. We hope these case studies will improve awareness of different risk communication strategies, for HABs and other contaminants of emerging concern, highlight resources already developed to aid with response efforts, and showcase partnerships forged to help address these contaminants in communities across the U.S. ECOS and ASTHO soon plan to embark on a second phase of the project to create a sample template for an actual advisory. This will include information on what communication models should look like, what doesn't work, and what guidance is needed for states compiling these materials. So today we will showcase two case studies on HABs risk communication. We have asked participants from two states we interviewed, Lynn Milberg of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, Larry Lawson of the Missouri Department of Health, and then Ben Holcomb and Christine Osborn of the Utah Department of Environmental Quality to describe their experiences, challenges they face, and how they develop and disseminate information to the public. Please hold questions until the end of both presentations. You can type them in the chat box on your screen for the facilitators to read, or you can ask them over the phone lines during the Q&A portion of our webinar. So with that, I'll hand the mic over to Larry and Lynn to tell us about how Missouri communicates risks of HABs.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, basically, what we wanted to start out with and kind of talk through today is many of the things that Sarah mentioned we encountered as we began working through trying to develop a response plan and deal with communication issues. And so we just kind of want to walk through some of those. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So one of the first things we wanted to touch on was as we really began trying to come up with a formal plan, we ran into several challenges that we felt like we needed to address. And of course, out of those, there came quite a few communication challenges, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in detail here in a moment. But I just wanted to briefly kind of touch on some of the kind of overarching issues that we ran into as we started putting things together. And one of the first things we identified was the fact that, and other states may relate to this, is that we have several different agencies that could have a role in responding to a harmful algal bloom, or who may hear about an algal bloom from the public. And so one of the things that we ran into was the fact that we didn't have a standardized and consistent method to report the blooms and to share that information amongst those that may be interested. And so that was one thing we quickly realized we needed to work towards. As with most agencies, obviously we have limited staffing and funding. Even with multiple agencies within those, there's a handful of staff with each agency that really focus on these. And so how do we go about providing a timely and yet effective response with those limited resources that we had? So that was the second thing that will always be a challenge, but something that we've, I think, come up with a reasonable solution for. One of the big things for us ultimately was who had authority to make a response and to try and implement the recommended actions that we were kind of thinking that we wanted to do. And so one of the biggest things we had to identify up front was who owns or manages the different water bodies. And for our state, we have a variety. Obviously, there could be private impoundments on farms or personal property, but we have situations where we have large recreational lakes that have utility company easements and play a major role. We have Army Corps, we have state agencies such as the Department of Conservation as well as the Department of Natural Resources. In a lot of instances, you have management is done by the local level, city or a county, and so obviously that creates some communication challenges there. Also recognizing that who makes the report may not be the one that can ultimately make some of the decisions. So how do we deal with that, and how do we come up with a response that's reasonable there? With that, one of the things we saw too was the DNR laboratory is the primary one that has some of the analytical capabilities as far as the state agencies go, but we currently do not have a mechanism in place to allow us to easily accept samples from outside entities. Other agencies, other federal agencies, that's not a problem. There are mechanisms in place for that, but if a city, for example, has a bloom at a local park and they wish to pursue testing, we do not have a simple way for them to be able to bring us a sample and for us to deal with it. And so that was a major challenge to overcome. And because of many of these things at this point, we are still strictly response-based. We do not have, from the state agency level, a routine monitoring program per se. So we are just dealing with situations kind of on a case-by-case basis as they're reported. Through the university in Columbia, Missouri, we do have a program that is funded and supported through state agencies. It's the Lakes of Missouri Volunteer Program. They do routine monitoring, but they do it in general water quality terms. However, over the last several years, they have begun adding in more and more cyanotoxin monitoring. And so we are starting to get a little bit of kind of background baseline monitoring type information through that, and also through the statewide lakes assessment program, which is also run through the university. But other than that, from an agency standpoint, we do not have any kind of monitoring such as park beaches or anything of that nature. It's not targeted, it's just as reported. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Larry, and he will begin to touch on some of the specific communication challenges. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide.
So everybody should be able to hear me, hopefully. So initially, when we developed the plan in, I guess it's our draft plan, started around 2016, I believe, still currently in draft form, but right off the bat, we realized that, there's no single location to provide information regarding HABs to the public or even for the management agencies. And so DNR developed a HAB website and that provides it's sort of our one-stop shop at this point, which provides, general HAB information, who might be affected, and what they should do. So it includes sort of that background information tab, and then it's got another tab on human health effects, and an additional tab for animals and livestock. And then also it has links to multiple other sites, including the Department of Health trifold brochure that's sort of a question and answer type form, and then provides links for reporting HABs as well, which we have, as Lynn mentioned, that was sort of the first part of the process, and we have now, I'd say 3 or 4 different mechanisms in which a report can come in directly, but it also occurs that, a lot of times it's just a private person sending an email to one of the various agencies, so hopefully that information gets relayed to us. And so I suppose an additional challenge then, after the plan was developed, we had the website in place now. Interagency cooperation and communication, something we should touch on, where, as Lynn mentioned, we have multiple states and federal agencies, particularly the Corps, involved. We have to ensure that there's prompt and consistent communication, and through that objective we developed a listserv, actually probably multiple listservs at this point, that all reports basically get funneled to the response team, which includes staff from the main state agencies, which would be DNR, Department of Health, and the Department of Conservation. Then we kind of determine who else needs to be notified based upon that report, and different email chains have been developed, but there's sort of the primary one that makes everybody aware, and then communication is handled more on a case-by-case basis after that, depending on a number of factors, mostly who owns the lake and sort of the magnitude and scale of the bloom and who might be affected by it. So, you're going to have differences ranging from a public beach, where we're obviously going to be concerned with human health, down to a private lake where it might be as simple as notifying the homeowner. And so then intra-agency issues have also arisen. Even though we have a plan and established reporting methods, getting the word out to staff within the agencies is important too, for mostly maintaining consistent messaging, but also reporting sort of requires that buy-in from the various agency representatives that might be handling these issues. We had an instance just today or yesterday that, a report came in to one member of another agency somewhere along the chain, and there's, 4 or 5 different communications back and forth before someone on our group, on the actual HAB working group, gets notified about it, and so maintaining that consistent messaging can become an issue there. And so that goes along the lines with, as Lynn mentioned again, the determining the ownership and management responsible for wherever the HAB is. We've had this occur a number of times where the report may come in from a citizen that may or may not have anything to do with the management of that water body. And in some cases, management may not want our assistance. And in other cases, they may want it, they just weren't aware of it. And then there's also, if we want to get on site, is the property restricted access? Is it open access? So a variety of issues there. In most cases, we'd get the report in, we'd determine who owns it, contact the owner, and without being strictly response-based at this point, in most cases, we would provide them with educational materials, health brochures, offer signs if it is believed to be or confirmed blue-green algae, and any other additional technical guidance. Unfortunately, we would not offer sample collection or analysis at the DNR lab if it's not a publicly owned water body, and it would be a case-by-case basis if it is a agency-owned water body. So there's a lot of challenges there, just figuring out the funding, the sampling, and who's actually responding. And finally, if we do actually get to run some sample analysis, there's that challenge of communicating results and what those analytical results might be. And, this is, again, going to be a case-by-case basis. Obviously where humans are going to be directly in the water itself, or we know there's animals that are going to be in there, that's going to increase our awareness and our response levels. So I'll hand it back to Lynn, and she can take over. And next slide, too.
So as we mentioned, one of the first things we identified was, how do we get reports? Where do they come from? How do we handle them? How do we make sure we're capturing the information that we feel like we need to make those decisions? And so one of the first things we tackled was the reporting side of things. And so we came up with decided to offer several different options. Both the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Health have an emergency hotline for reporting incidents. So that was kind of a natural, already built-in mechanism that we had. And so one of the things we did was, for DNR, we worked with our emergency responders and those that are on the hotline and take the calls to ensure that they have information, they know what we need, and that they have the guidance and the educational materials that Larry mentioned at their fingertips so that they can provide that. Once they take that information, it then can be passed along to the response team, and we can kind of go from there. Additionally, we recognize that there's likely that calls could come directly to the regional offices of any of the agencies as well. And so, again, we wanted to make sure that we were capturing the information, and this kind of goes to that intra as well as interagency communication challenge. And how do we do that? How do we not create additional work and additional forms? We're all familiar with lots of paperwork and stuff we have to fill out. So how do we not just add on to that? And, if the region already has a response form that they have to complete, we didn't want to tack on to that, but how do we make sure we get the additional information? And so we've developed a response form, which is that third bullet, the suspected harmful algal bloom notification form that is available on our webpage. And so we have tried to get that out there so that that is available to any of the agencies, any of the staff, because they can just go to the website, click it, it's a fillable PDF form, and then they can email that. At the same time, if they already have a form that they have to complete, then they can just familiarize themselves with that, make sure they know what we need to have to make our decisions, and then they can submit that to us using whatever they currently have. And the final thing we did was we are a participant on the Bloom Watch app, which came out of the Cyanos project, and many of y'all may be familiar with that. And the app is a super simple way that folks can complete information. They can take pictures, they can pull the GPS points off, and basically once they submit that, it goes to the Bloom Watch Cyanos folks. They receive it, and once they have that information, they will then forward it to our response team, and we can follow up from there. So those are kind of the ways we tried to get it out there. Once a report comes in, it comes to the response team, as Larry mentioned, that's got staff from the three main agencies, as well as drinking water folks, which are a part of DNR. We will all review the report, take a look at it, determine the ownership, and then kind of from there we'll decide who's going to take on the different roles. Who needs to contact ownership? Do we need to, are there local health departments that need to be notified, or some other agency, maybe a Parks and Rec or something of that nature that needs to be notified? And we'll kind of divvy up those roles at that point and go from there. And to be consistent with our follow-up, we developed what we call a hazard level recommendation matrix. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. I know this is maybe kind of hard to read, but this is our matrix that we developed, and basically we have 3 different hazard levels, and then from that we developed recommendations for further actions based upon which hazard level that you're at. And this all, again, goes back to who is the owner or manager of the water body, and so these are the recommendations that we would provide to them. We felt this was the best method so that we were, again, consistent within agencies, but that we had something to guide. Now, if a regional office receives a report and they feel like they need to follow up for a variety of reasons, they are free to do that. These are just basically our starting point recommendations. So the 3 hazard levels, we have nonspecific bloom. There's a concern of some sort, but we don't know that it's blue-green. We still need to do investigations. At that point, we're not going to make any specific notifications or restrictions, but we would probably recommend trying to do some additional testing to confirm things. And we have chosen the jar and stick test, which KDHE folks would be familiar with. It's a quick and simple test that they can do to kind of confirm whether there may be blue-green algae and help us sort that out. If it is confirmed, we move to level 2, in which case we would consider possibly doing some posting of signs and notifications just to let people know that there is a bloom. Obviously, we may or may not know if there's any toxins present, so because of that, we would recommend considering restrictions, and then if possible to continue on with some testing to confirm whether there are or are not toxins present. Level 3 would then be a confirmed harmful algal bloom where we either have high cell densities or toxins present. We developed action levels of our own. The Department of Health did several reviews of information and different guidances and developed the levels that you see there for Missouri. And at that point, based upon results, we'll determine which notifications. Department of Health also developed a sign that we can offer to folks. If they do choose to post, they're welcome to make their own if they want, but we have that available as a resource. And then from that, we would kind of determine what future testing may be needed. A lot of that's going to be very dependent, again, whether if that's a private property, they would be on their own to pursue that. If it is a public swimming area, say a swimming beach or something of that nature, we would determine how much we need to follow up on that, how often we need to test, and what the recommendations would be for maintaining restrictions at that point. With all that said, if it is a drinking water reservoir, that changes everything. The Public Drinking Water Program developed their own protocol to handle that. With that, we use the Abraxas dipstick tests to test both the raw and the finished water to ensure that toxins are not either getting into the plant, or if they have entered or entering the plant, that they are not coming out in the finished water. And so they have their own protocol that is available, and again, everything kind of changes and shifts into that. And because DNR and health have more authority in the drinking water area, it gives us more opportunity to make some decisions as far as testing and things of that nature, so we would take it to a different level. Next slide, please. Just real quickly, Larry mentioned the web page. This is just a screenshot from that. That was one of the main things we wanted to get out for a variety of reasons. One, it helped us kind of cover some of the general communication issues. It also helps the intra and interagency concerns as far as having things available. You know, every agency has their own network and their own drives and everything, so how do we get this stuff out there? How do we make sure everybody's getting the most up-to-date information? And so we made all of this available on the web page, so it is there. That is on the public page. It has a number of links, as Larry mentioned, to other resources. And so, again, just trying to cover a wide swath of information for folks, and to help the public just know and learn, but then also to know what to do and how to make a report if they so choose. And under the human health information, they can access the public drinking water protocols. So if we have operators for those drinking water facilities, they can also access information from that site as well. So that was one of the things we were very glad to see go live earlier this year. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I will turn it back over to Larry. I know we're getting close on our time, and he's going to touch on a few of the things that we are still thinking about and still looking at for as we continue to develop our processes.
So I know a lot of states are probably wondering about fish and bioaccumulation of cyanotoxins in fish. This is one area where we're doing some research, collaboration with the University of Missouri-Columbia, professor there, and she has a grad student. We're looking at a lake that we know has frequent algae blooms, and they've been monitoring that for a while now. So we're going to look at some methods of testing cyanotoxins in fish tissue, and then particularly we're looking at largemouth bass in this case. So that's one area we're looking at right now. Another deal would be a dedicated HAB hotline similar to the Department of Conservation's fish kill hotline. I'm not sure where we're at on that at this point, but it's certainly something we're considering. I know a few other states have developed maps of some type or another. We have one for our fish advisory, but it's much less interactive, I guess, in the case of a HAB where things are always changing. And so I would envision some immediate issues with using a map for up-to-date information, just because we have to go through so much approval to change anything on our website. I could see some immediate issues right there. As well as requirements that, keeping a map up to date would require follow-up testing, and we just don't have those capabilities at this time based on funding. And then there's also the issue of certain water bodies or management agencies may not want that information widely distributed on, say, a website, so there could be some issues there. And then I guess the state lab accessibility for private testing would be something interesting, something we've discussed, and we're heading in that direction, but I don't think we're going to be making any promises anytime soon. And then from a health standpoint and tracking, clinical determinations, distinguishing HAB-related illnesses from other illnesses, and being able to get this buy-in from physicians and veterinarians to help us track these issues would probably help in our funding interests and otherwise. And just generally on reporting and tracking is somewhere where we're looking into is how do we get issues of illnesses into a database and present that to management would be of interest to us. So I think that pretty much sums it up, and I know we're getting close on time, so thank you.
That website that's listed there at the top is our web page, the one that you saw the screenshot of just a little while ago. So feel free to go out and poke around on that and see if there's anything that's helpful. And we are both available at later times if you have future questions. I know there may be opportunities at the end for us to answer some things if you have anything, but you are always welcome to contact us, and we'd be glad to help however we can. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn and Larry. Again, we will have an opportunity at the end for questions for both of our states, but we're going to go ahead and move on to our team at the Utah Department of Environmental Quality to talk about their HAB communication strategies.
Thank you. This is Ben Holcomb with Division of Water Quality. So I'm going to cover a lot of what Missouri discussed. We do very similarly in terms of how we monitor and collect data and the processes. So this discussion is going to focus more on how we communicate internally and externally. So here in Utah, the primacy for protecting public health lies within the local health departments. So we have about 13 local health departments across the state, and our goal is to provide them the most up-to-date information. We provide the science to them, and we want to get that information to them quickly. So our main goals are to basically have the essential resources to carry forth some of those activities, and then to alert the local health departments immediately. Our goal is within 24 hours to give them the kind of information they need to make decisions to protect public health. And then along with that, we have a lot of connections with other entities and agencies that have specific stakeholders that may be affected by a harmful algal bloom, but need to have a different kind of information, or they need to communicate differently. And so we have a pretty good relationship with all of those agencies, and we're quite well connected on how we share information with each other. So our main points of communication come through we have a built-in DEQ spill line. So this, historically was built to handle all kind of spill-related emergencies, and since a harmful algal bloom is not necessarily a spill, but is an environmental incident, so we are able to fold this activity into the capabilities of the spill line. So this operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's also outfitted with a database system that's able to generate incident reports, and it can connect to all kinds of, many of the agencies that may be affected by whatever environmental incident is occurring. So we have individuals identified across the state and within certain geographic regions that we can connect to relatively quickly through both email and their cell phone if needed, and certainly their office number. And we also have or recommend that when people have been impacted or have been in contact with potential cyanobacteria, that they contact our Utah Poison Control Center. The Poison Control Center has a series of questions that they ask to try to get very specific information. And then they are also connected with the CDC, who logs these kinds of cases into their national database. Similar to Missouri, we utilize the Bloom Watch app so that individuals, if they are out on the water bottom recreating, they can collect the appropriate information and alert us through the app. Additionally, we have our website. We don't have a form built yet, but we still have various individual contact information there that they can contact us through the website. And the website is also our main portal for communicating out to the public as well. And then our partner in this endeavor is our Department of Health, and they also have a website that has a lot of the basic information and links back to our website. So broadly, here's just a diagram that kind of describes how we go about receiving information, how we process it, and what we do with it. So as I mentioned, we have a number of ways that we can receive an incident report or any kind of an alert that the public or someone from a different agency may have observed a cyanobacteria bloom. That will come into us through those multiple ways, and then we'll go into a response mode of trying to validate and locate that incident. And so validation occurs in similar forms to what Missouri described, and that could be things like, using the observation, if they send us photos, using the jar and stick tests, have them conduct a strip test if it's available. And then if any of that's positive, then we report it out through our incident notification system that's connected to our spill line. And that contacts the specific agencies that need to be involved in this. So if the water body has, if it's protected for drinking water use or whatever the recreational use may be, if there are state parks involved, all of those agencies will be notified. And so we'll also formally collect samples and submit those to our, we have 2 in-state labs that can conduct an ELISA analysis. That's the immunoassay analysis for the toxins. And they can be processed relatively quickly within 48 to 72 hours. And then we also use an out-of-state lab to process cell identification and enumeration, and that's typically provided back to us within about 72 hours. And then once we receive the data, we process it here in DWQ, and then we begin our communication with our partners on how we are going to communicate internally, how we're going to stay in touch, how we're going to notify the public, whether it's through our website and press releases, and Christine will get into more detail with that information. So I'll turn this over to Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Osborn, and I'm with the Communications Office at DEQ. One of the things that we have found that's really useful is the collaboration we have with the Division of Water Quality and our Communications Office. While we have a very small Communications Office, we've been very responsive because we understand how important HABs are to the people, to the public, and to our stakeholders. So we came up with a strategic communication plan that we've been using for the past couple of years to try to ensure that we're getting out good information to our partners and to the public. So one of the first things that we did is we put together a contact list for all affected agencies and entities. And we realized once we got started that it was a larger group than we originally thought. We were looking at mostly the primary state agencies like Department of Natural Resources, Department of Agriculture, local health departments, and Utah Department of Health. But then we realized that other entities would be involved, like municipalities and secondary water systems, irrigation companies. And so we have compiled a very comprehensive list so that these people can be notified once we get information. We've created a protocol, as Ben was talking about, for contacting the affected agencies once we get an incident report put together through our spill line. And once HAB season starts, we generally have at least one conference call a week so that different entities and stakeholders can call in, and we'll discuss sort of what's going on with a particular bloom, particular water body, get information, figure out how we want to coordinate our messaging and response. We have we've had DEQ as basically the coordinating agency entity for all bloom events, and we've called in the Division of Emergency Management when things have gotten a little bit bigger than just DWQ can handle. And then we've discussed the roles and responsibilities for each agency and entity during blooms. That was a really important part of our communication strategy moving forward, making very clear that local health departments are the ones who issue the advisories. DEQ provides the data to inform the decisions for making an advisory. So messaging we found was really important. We wanted to all be on the same page. We have asked all of our stakeholders to fill out a SOCO, or Single Overriding Communication Objective, which is very similar to a message map. This is a consistent template that everybody can use so that we can coordinate messaging for all agencies and entities. One of the nice things about this is that sometimes we don't know what a particular group has as their main concerns or what their audience is going to have as their main concerns. And by creating these message maps, all of us have an idea, and I'm sure that the messaging that we send out addresses all of these issues. So we have user group SOCOs that are prepared prior to the bloom season, and then once a bloom occurs, we create a water body specific SOCO on a case-by-case basis. We also look at creating forecast SOCOs before the season starts to kind of give people an idea of where their blooms may be happening. And we've also created a one source of truth fact sheet that's accessible on our website that anybody can use, download, that has the general questions that the public or the media might have about harmful algal blooms from the health effects to what a harmful algal bloom actually is. So press release coordination is really important. The picture you see right here is the Schofield Reservoir. This was several years ago. We had a harmful algal bloom, and it was pretty significant. As you can see, a large fish kill. Right now, in fact, we are working with the Summit County Health Department on a very small bloom that was discovered yesterday during testing that DWQ was doing. They sampled, sent the results in, did the rapid test strip test, found out that we had elevated levels of microcystin. That occurred last night, and immediately the health department was notified, and as we speak they've drafted a press release which is going to go out, and we've created a web page update. So we've gotten pretty good about working with our partners to move quickly and analyze what the situation is, ensure that there's accurate data, and local health departments are working with us closely to ensure that any cautions or advisories that need to be issued are issued in a timely manner. And we're working actually on a Google Doc for drafting the press release. So social media coordination, as Missouri mentioned, that can be a little tricky because you do not want to create any sort of miscommunication or misunderstanding of what the algal bloom is. So we've been working with our partners to create consistent messages on social media, a lot of sharing and using of hashtags. We reiterate main messages across all of our social media posts, whether it's Twitter or Facebook. We explain what the advisories mean so that people understand what you can and cannot do and what the situation actually is. We always include the poison control phone number with our social media posts if there's an active bloom. One of the benefits of that is that our poison control folks have been able to collect data that they would not be able to get otherwise. So people call their local physician, it doesn't necessarily get reported. So poison control has really appreciated the fact that the data goes through them first, and they have 24-hour on-call specialists who know how to deal with HABs-related illnesses. And then we have our DEQ webpage, habs.udov.gov, for updates. So we try to send people there. We put our updates up as soon as we have the information so that the public knows that they can check in and find out what's going on with the bloom, and there'll be progress reports, pictures, all kinds of things like that. Facebook Live we found to be really useful. In fact, 2 weeks ago we did a Facebook Live with, we had media available for it. We posted it on our website, our Facebook page, and we've received a lot of responses from that. One of the nice things about the Facebook Live is that we can use it again and again as a resource for people who have basic questions about HABs, and also to let people know that we want to communicate in real time with folks about HABs. So that's been one of our outreach tools, and it's been very successful. Utah DEQ is the central repository for information. We want to be sure that all of our partners and stakeholders have access to information as we get it. And the Drive folder has a lot of information. We have press releases, our FAQ and fact sheets, and our SOCOs. We have a shared spreadsheet with contact emails and phone numbers, shared Google Docs with links to agency and entity HABs web pages. We have photos that people can look at, and most importantly, we have a shared spreadsheet with the lab results for cyanobacteria cell counts, taxa, and the 3 cyanotoxins that we test for: microcystin, cylindrospermopsin, and anatoxin A. So all our stakeholders and partners, agencies, are able to access this information in real time. We created consistent signage, which is not required, but we have suggested and recommended that local health departments post these signs. We have a strategic communication workshop group, and the work group came together to come up with a sign that we felt was easy to interpret, easy to understand, so that when people see this, they'll know what it means, what people can and cannot do when they see a warning sign, so there's not the kind of miscommunication that can happen if there are a lot of different signs going up with different information on it. We put the signs in English and Spanish, and we've got the templates distributed through our website so that anyone who needs to post a sign can easily access the sign and use this template to post their own signs. We're in discussions currently about a permanent signage at Utah Lake, which experiences blooms most of the summers, and that's sort of ongoing, but that will be very helpful with a little flip sign that if there is a bloom, the warning sign will come down. Otherwise, people will know that it's safe to be out there. As you can see on the sign, there's the Utah Poison Control number, the DEQ spill line to report a bloom, and our website URL for more information. We've worked really hard to make our website easy to navigate and get good information on it. You can access current advisories, and we are in the process of getting an interactive map put together so that people will be able to come here and see exactly where the bloom is located on a water body, so they'll know areas to avoid and understand that maybe not all of the water body is affected, it's only partially. So we think that will be very helpful for recreationists to know when they go to visit a water body what they need to avoid. We have a reported bloom, which is the DEQ spill line. We have a link to a Protect Yourself, which kind of tells people what they can do when they're in an area that's experiencing a bloom or that they suspect is experiencing a bloom. A list of health risks and health effects. We have a tab for response agency resources, which includes response plans for Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, a drinking water response plan, a list of other resources, and the recreational health advisory guidance. And we have a photo gallery so people can click on that and look, members of the public can look and see what different kinds of algal blooms look like, so they'll be able to recognize it more easily. We also have the Bloom Watch app, as was mentioned before by Missouri, that people can download onto their phone. We have if you look on the far right-hand corner at the bottom, we have a link that people can click on so they can easily upload the app to their mobile devices. The way we've got our website for updates laid out, we have an at-a-glance template with weekly snapshot of activities and advisories. You can see that on the right. We include the data samples were taken, the data sample results were received, the water body involved, the cell counts, toxin levels and types, and if there is an advisory, we put all that advisory information up there as well. We're putting together an update as we speak for this recent bloom in Rockport Reservoir, which is very limited, so that people understand what's going on and the recommendations that the local health department has for it. And we also have an email alert sign up on a listserv on our HAPS web pages, so people can access that if they want to find out whenever the web page is updated. And that's it.
Great. Thank you all for your very informative presentations. You shared with us really great communication strategies, communication challenges, and fruitful partnerships. So now with the remaining time, we'd like to open up the floor to questions for either state team. You can either type them in the chat box on your screen for the facilitators to read, or you can ask them over the phone lines. So we'll turn to our operator to open up the phone lines.
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question, please signal by pressing *1 now. That's *1 to ask a question. We'll pause for one moment to allow everyone to signal.
Okay. And while we're waiting, I can go ahead and ask a question for the chat box. It is for both states. It is, how many reports do you receive yearly through the Bloom Watch app?
Well, actually, I was just typing mine in, but so Utah, we just started announcing the capability of the app this year, and so far we haven't received any reports through the app, but it's I suspect it'll be used through our volunteer program. We have a program through our local university extension office where they have volunteers collect kind of bi-weekly information, and they've been recommended to use the Bloom Watch app to submit those kind of notifications.
We're kind of in the same boat. We've been trying to get the word out about the app, also through our volunteer program. They are in the process of kind of revamping some of their educational material, so I think that'll be something that will probably go out more over the course of the next year. So we're in the same boat. We have not received any reports through the app at this point.
Great, thank you. And another question in the chat box. This is for Larry in Missouri. Do you notify residents surrounding a private lake with a bloom? If so, how are you obtaining their contact information, or is that notification done by a local board of health?
So if it's a private water body, we would not be notifying anyone except for the owner of the water body or the manager, and that would be in the form of we would recommend they post signs or whatever the hazard may be, but signs would be our most general recommendation. If it's a public water body, even then we would still probably just post signs as well. We're non-regulatory, so we don't really have any authority to force anyone to do much of anything, so kind of leaves us with providing these general recommendations.
That has been a little bit of a challenge for us. We had a incident probably a little over a year ago now where there was a homeowner at a water body who called to say that there was a bloom going on, and it was a very significant one, and it was actually late in the year, so it wasn't during the typical season. And this was a water body that was, the community around it was part of a homeowners association, and that was one that became a real challenge for us because the homeowners association didn't want us there at all, but some of the homeowners were quite concerned. So in that case, that was one where, like Larry said, we didn't necessarily have the authority to push with things. We did notify the local, I think the local health department, I believe, was notified in that one. And honestly, through that, we went back to the homeowner just to do follow-up and let them know that, here's what we understand of the situation, here are the concerns. We provided them all of the information, and eventually through the conversation it was asked if the homeowners association had been made aware, and we let them know that we had contacted them and that we had been told that our assistance was no longer needed. And so basically the homeowner at that point then said, can you provide me something and I will go around to my neighbors to let them know. And so again, it's one of those, we couldn't put information out in a lot of ways, but so we tried to use what we did have available to us, and that was the people who were concerned.
Thank you. Do we have any questions over the phone?
There are no questions over the phone at this time.
Okay, so we have a few more in the chat box then. We can probably take one or two more before we conclude. So this is a question for Utah. What factors do you feel drive your algal blooms?
Well, we know it's both local and global changes that are occurring on our water bodies, so that's not a simple answer. Each water body is unique. So on our largest water body that's experiencing these bloom events, it's been just a history of human activity around that water body through a combination of agricultural practices, the stormwater of a growing city, and municipalities. There's several municipalities that discharge into this water body. And when you're in that kind of situation, that water body is just not resilient to any kind of global changes. And so we're seeing these kind of events occur more frequently just due to those kind of combination of those two changes. We're generally not agricultural. We're not a big agricultural state, But I think a lot of our water bodies are just generally sensitive to begin with.
Great, thank you. And I'll take one more question, and this has to do with the risk communication. It says the words we use are important. EPA and states all interchangeably use blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, and cyanotoxins. I worry we are confusing the public and calling it something it is not, and by not being consistent. Are you using consistent terms within your state, and which ones and why?
Well, we've been working very hard to inform people that it's cyanobacteria and cyanotoxins. So while we sometimes use algae, and we actually include algae as part of our tags on our website because that's how people get to it, when we do our updates, we talk about cyanobacteria cell count, we talk about cyanotoxins, we explain what they mean on our fact sheets. So we're working very hard to clarify what cyanobacteria are and what cyanotoxins are, so that people are not confused and thinking blue-green algae. We'd like them to use the more scientific term, and we found that reporters are responding well to that as well. They still sometimes talk about blue-green algae, but we're seeing cyanobacteria and cyanotoxins used more often in press reports. So we will continue to sort of hammer away at that as part of our public education process.
We're very similar here. We will use especially like on the web page and some of our different portions, we have used the blue-green algae term just because that's what many people are familiar with. But in any of the educational articles and different things, technical articles that we've used, we always try to go with the cyanobacteria, cyanotoxins, and then as best as possible, take the opportunities to try and educate and, say, kind of fun ways of, well, blue-green algae really is not, it's a misnomer type of thing, and then try to explain that. But yeah, we're similar with any of our stuff. When we tag stuff, we always use the other terms as well, just so that if somebody searches, they should be able to find it. And we also have tried to differentiate, we tend to use the HABs. That one's been a little bit harder to kind of get into the mode of cyanohab versus, you could have a, non-cyanobacteria bloom that could be harmful from an ecological standpoint, and we recognize that as scientists, but again, that's just kind of the common term that's out there, so we try to work with it, and when we can, expand people's understanding.
Great, thank you. And thank you again for joining the webinar today. So we will email all participants today a copy of the state slides and contact information. And there's some from Utah in the chat box there as well if you did not catch that on the screen. In addition, since this concludes our risk communication webinar series, we will be posting the final case studies for all 13 states on our websites, both the ASTHO and ECOS website for public viewing. We'll send the links to those to the group as well. So thanks again for your interest in these topics, and we hope you have a great afternoon.